Welcome back to 1920s Part 2. We're going to start with consumerism of the 1920s, very much a consumer culture. We need to remind ourselves the role psychology plays in history. And 1920s, we do see psychology have a very strong foundation. We'll come back to it here in a bit. But we see that psychology proves that human beings love to conform. Reason being, we want to be accepted by people around us. So this is why we buy certain products. And we see that studies show, even in the 1920s, marketing firms figured this out, that people don't buy based off taste. They buy based off of what helps them conform, what helps them become part of the group, be accepted. And will influence what people wear, to what people drive, to what people smoke. Cigarettes, you couldn't tell the difference, but people preferred certain brands because of this brand loyalty. And brand loyalty is because we want to be part of a group, want to be accepted. So we see 1920s filled with consumerism, this consumerism culture. As Kenzie mentioned, to be American, to be patriotic is to buy, to consume. And marketing firms are going to play off the fact that they want to get people to buy. And we were talking automobiles, to cigarettes, to clothes, they want to convince Americans that they need these products. If you have a car, you need a second one. And this is what they're really selling. They're pushing this on Americans, and Americans are consuming. One reason why Americans are consuming more so is because we see credit. We see banks giving credit to people to go ahead and take loans and pay things off in installment buying, they called it. So this is a consumer culture. I have a picture of Calvin Coolidge bottom left because he says American business in America, or American society, is business. Business is the motivator. It's the cycle. We see brands like cigarette brands or car companies. They're targeting women, and we see women who have been emancipated in the 1920s have the right to vote. They're fighting for equality in different places. We see that women will be looked at as a consumer. They'll be viewed as a consumer. And cigarettes are called liberty torches. When you smoke a cigarette, you're in control. You're independent, and they play off this. And this is Marlboro. If you're a rancher, cowboy, the Marlboro Reds, the cowboy, he's rugged, he's tough. smoke Marlboros. You're independent. That's why you're a cowboy. That's what you do out west. So we see them playing off of these subconscious desires human beings have. Marketing firms to this present day, they know what drives us. And we have the third person effect, another psychology thing. Even though a company may not influence you to buy something based off the commercial, by seeing other people buying it or wearing it, you want to buy it. And that's that third party effect. Just interesting. So here's some other things that are going on, 1920s. And this is Kenzie's topic. Now, when I say consumerism, we're talking mass culture. You got mass production. So you have millions of products coming off of assembly lines, and they convince people to buy them. So we see things like the radio and cinema. They're going to help really push this mass culture where people are buying and conforming to other people's expectations. We see places, things like sports heroes. Sports people become heroes in the 1920s. People like Babe Ruth, Rico Caruso, and you see 1920s really with the modern celebrities we know it is formed. You get Charlie Chaplin on the top right here. He was an interesting figure. He was a silent movie star. He's actually worked in vaudeville shows, the places like where Jim Crow became famous. But he was a silent film star, and he actually is one of the few that actually was able to transition and still stay a star in the 1920s with the transition over to talkies, the movie sounds, which many stars, the silent stars actually, the strong accents prevented them from becoming, staying a movie star. Charlie Chaplin was somebody who had some skeletons in his closet. He actually impregnated, he had an affliction for young girls. He actually, I think, dated, from my understanding, he dated a 12, 13-year-old, impregnated her by 16. He actually was able to survive this scandal, oddly enough, or unfortunately enough, maybe. Babe Ruth, bottom left, he's a guy known to save baseball. This follows the 1919 Black Sox when Rothstein bought the the World Series fixed it. And you also have Jack Dempsey, and he's a people's champ, working class, rags to riches stories. This is what America promotes. This is what we want to sell. This rags to riches. And Babe Ruth, same thing. He was his parents didn't love him much, and he becomes one of the most beloved baseball players of all time. So these things all play a role. 1920s, and someone complained to Babe Ruth, about making more money than President Hoover. And this would be in the late 1920s, early 30s, and his reply, he's known as, he's a pretty humorous dude. His reply was, "I know, but I had a better year than Hoover." So I thought that was funny. So this is what is coming to America. This is the birth of the modern celebrity, thanks to this mass culture. Americans also are free to, they have more money in the 1920s, so they have more time on their hands as well. So they're going to attend baseball games, movie theaters be a popular thing. With the automobile, a lot of tourism, going on vacation now. You're going to see that pushed upon more. Florida will take off in the 1920s, creating a bubble. Eventually that bubble will burst in mid-1920s, kind of foreshadowing what's to come with the American economy. But Americans will be traveling south to go on vacation, warmer climates. In Florida as well, they didn't really enforce prohibition, so easy to get hands on alcohol. You can probably say the same for many things in the north too. But this is looking there. Thanks to this mass culture, this radio, we see places like New Orleans and also the Great Migration with African Americans moving north. We see that this culture gets to express itself. We have known as the Jazz Age, which was coined by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Excuse me. And we see these jazz players. African Americans will be head honchos when it comes to jazz, and they'll be playing these instruments in clubs throughout the night and into the early morning hours. And we see dances like the Charleston take off. This mass culture. This reinforces people are doing, they're conforming, and they're doing things to, fit in. And the Charleston was known as a very popular dance in the 1920s. We have Louis Armstrong here, who will follow around a guy by the name of King Oliver in New Orleans, who will be a mentor to him and just kind of reinforces Louis Armstrong, one of the most well-known jazz singers, jazz players of all time. He didn't get there on his own. King Oliver played a big role and influence on him. And we see a lot of these African Americans, as I said, migrate to northern cities, bring this music up there. We see that flowing through the radio. So other African Americans, 1920s, that are very well known from left to right. We have Booker T. Washington, who founded the Tuskegee Institute. You folks read about him in Going to the Source. Booker T., he was somebody who was considered accommodationist. He didn't want to challenge all the racism going on in America. Instead, he wants to lift the black person up by teaching them practical skills, technical skills, carpentry, farming. And he thinks that if we just do these things, we'll prove to the whites that we are not only responsible citizens, but we are productive citizens, and we can help. So Booker T., he was very much criticized by the younger W.E.B. Du Bois, the guy in the middle there, who will challenge this, and he will say he wants rights now. He doesn't want to accommodate. So if you look at these two, and you guys know W.E.B. Du Bois will be one of the helping founders of NAACP, and he becomes the lead writer in The Crisis, which is the African American paper. But you see these two kind of, to me, they lay the foundations for the 1950s and 60s civil rights movement with Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. And, Martin Luther King Jr. would be considered more of accommodationist, you could argue, in some regards. And not in the same token as Booker T. Two different theories there, but just more of turn the other cheek, passive aggressive. And then we have on the far right over here is Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey, he is somebody who he believed in black pride, and he wanted to lift the African Americans up by giving them confidence. The one thing he made a big argument about, and what one of the long-lasting impacts of slavery was, it took confidence from the African American. He wants to lift them back up. He believes if Europe is for whites, why not have Africa be for blacks? And he wants to uplift and uproot African Americans in America and take them to Africa. And he has this black nationalist movement, Black Power, again, picked up by the Black Panther Party in the 1960s. we see Marcus Garvey will actually be busted for embezzling money. He'll be forced into exile, essentially, deported, I should say, to Jamaica, and then he will actually end up dying in London, England. But we see these are the African American leaders of the 1920s and leading up to the 1920s. Their ideas, and again, reinforcing that the Black voices were not all just one. They each had their own beliefs on how to end and better African Americans' lives. W.B. Du Bois was not a big fan of Marcus Garvey, nor Booker T, vice versa. So we have also at the time we have Hollywood land taken off. World War One. Paris was known for its film industry, but following World War One, Hollywood will take the lead. Money shifts to Hollywood. They pick Hollywood because it has nice weather pretty much year round. So this is an attractive place for film producers. We continue to invest money in Hollywood, and we will see that these will create celebrity icons and people that become new heroes inside of not just in America, but in the world. Hollywood takes the lead throughout the world, and it's going to help sell America's image to the rest of the world. The glamour and the fashion, all the way up through modern day. I'm just reading about Eva Braun, for example, Hitler's mistress, the woman he married before they committed suicide. She was a huge fan of Hollywood and all the fashions and the actresses. And, one of Hitler's favorite movies was Gone with the Wind, which came out in 1939. So we see that. Here's an example. We have Louis Brooks over here, who challenged gender roles, cutting her hair short. She's considered by many historians the first flapper. But we see the influence over here. Here's a painting from Japan in 1930 titled Tipsy. We have a Japanese-American girl who is showing a lot of skin, wearing makeup, wearing lipstick, has a short haircut, much like the West, and, drinking and smoking cigs. So this shows you the impact the Hollywood has throughout the world, and again, creating that mass culture. Talking about one person who came across here, the Rudolph Valentino. He was known as a Latin lover. Show you the power of the celebrity. He actually passes away suddenly in 1926, and there are 8 blocks of mourners at his funeral. Many women commit suicide because they're in such grief over this star. So this kind of just reinforces the power of the movies and Hollywood and cinema on the culture. As you guys and as Rachel talked about, we have Zelda here, Zelda Fitzgerald. This is F. Scott and Zelda on the right here. And he considers her the first American flapper. So debatable who really started this movement. Probably doesn't really know. And again, we're looking at psychology here. We're going to talk about Sigmund Freud here in a moment. And Freud believed that we should not repress, we should not suppress our desires. So we should just act out. And Zelda was a example of that. And girls who tend to have a very strict father, sometimes they lash out later in life once they get free. They don't hold anything back. And Zelda had a very strict father. So this may be why she kind of acts out. She's very insecure in many ways. I don't think she was the happiest soul. And she lived life on the edge. She partied hard. She wasn't afraid to take some clothes off and flirt with multiple men, especially in front of her husband. Her and F. Scott fought a lot. She dies in a fire tragically, and Scott dies young too. He was an alcoholic. So they live this flapper lifestyle and this partying lifestyle, and it will cut their lives short. But these flappers, it's progressive era. These women burst onto the scene. We have this new feminism. We have to remind ourselves, persona is Greek for mask. These women are wearing a mask. They're out in public for the first time. They realize they have a personality, and they gain confidence. And they're going to be more bold in the 1920s compared to years past. They're going to bars, men are mingling with them, they're flirting with them. And we see that this is really where the modern woman kind of stems from, grows from, and these speakeasies going on. So here's another example of the flappers, this progressive era. These are nonconformists to gender roles and traditional beliefs. They're younger, and again, as we talked about, a lot of the population in the 1920s was young. You have the bobbed hair, the short skirts, public smoking and drinking, free expression for birth control. This plays a huge role. We're going to talk about here in a moment. And these ladies went to the dance halls and nightclubs, and they performed that Charleston, that dance, which was long popular in black communities. So we see these women finding themselves and asserting themselves, and you see more willingness to divorce in the 1920s. They want to chase happiness, and this is where Freud comes into play. He was very popular in the 1920s. He was somebody who, again, as I pointed out, he believes that we should not repress. We should just go after that which makes us happy. And people are going to take this as a means to do what they want in that pursuit of happiness. And he believed that there was a power in the unconscious mind, and he believed that this unconscious is what drives us. It's not what we actually consciously think about. It's the unconscious. It's the things that happen to us as a child. This will actually really shape us into doing different things. And again, marketing firms, they play off of this unconscious, that power to conform. Now, Freud's argument on sex, he says we should all be open to sex. He believed it was healthy for us. And as people are reading and studying this, it's shaping their views on sex and being more open to it. And people hold on to these theories, and marketers are going to play off of this sexual desire, this id, this unconscious that Freud talks about. He talked about that's a guideline for motivation. And going back to these women, women were wearing makeup for the first time, and people who wore makeup, women who wore makeup in the past, before the 1920s, going back to that gender roles and these stereotypes, they were known as fast women. These were known as your sluts, your those negative connotations you guys have for people who are openly engaged in sexual activity. Flasks that are all-time high. Again, and going back here, we all realized too in the 1920s, leading up, we're all insecure. We all have insecurities. So people are playing off of this, and they're making decisions based off their insecurities. Maybe even more heightened because we have more comparison in the 1920s with all these movie stars. So changes took place very quickly. It wasn't gradual, and women were twice as likely to lose their virginity before they're married as the previous generation. And I think girls felt pressured to do so based off of in some of the early movies were really playing off some of these used to be social taboos. So sex used to be viewed as dirty, and we're going to see that change in the 1920s. You don't need to feel guilty. You don't need to feel anxious. And the big thing that really changes things, and Rachel on this too, is Margaret Sanger, who comes up with who really pushes the idea of birth control. She's the one who starts Planned Parenthood, and she saw all these unwanted pregnancies, these miscarriages, these abortions back alley, and thousands of women who died because of it. So she's really been pushing for birth control for women, and we're going to see as a result, with more women taking birth control, they're going to be more open to taking those risks. The last thing we want security. We want to feel, a woman, her desire is to feel secure and her children to be taken care of. So beforehand, it was so risky to have sex before marriage because if you got impregnated and the guy left, you're stuck in a laissez-faire society, and you're going to need family members and other people to help you, and you're dependent on them. In 1920s with birth control, that's going to be lifted, and we see maybe women more open to taking that risk because it's much lower. Now, moving on from this and looking at the 1920s, it's really known for three major trials. And those trials, you know what? Let me digress here. I'm just looking at some things here. Things I may have missed. The Margaret Sanger here, she actually will be somebody who's kind of loses some of her, she just gets thrown in prison for pushing birth control at the time. But she actually believed in eugenics as well. which was something that the Nazis make really filthy. Just want to make sure I hit on that. Anything else I'm looking at here? Looking back to my notes. Guess I shouldn't have went back. By the way, I know Rachel hit on the flapper is for a young chick trying to learn how to fly. The origin of flapper I found was is actually very debatable. It's not agreed upon when it came about. Another book I read said it originated in Britain, and it was because a woman who wore her shoes open and it was always flapping the shoe. So there's multiple different definitions on where the word flapper comes from. We do know it becomes in vogue 1920s, and more women will push for it. Now, back to the 1920s. We need to remind ourselves that 1920s is a very conservative Supreme Court. It is known for 3 really famous trials in the 1920s. We know Sadie hit on the one, Sacco and Vanzetti, which is these 2 guys on the left here. The other real famous one, these guys, by the way, were known to be anarchists and communists. They came from Europe and Italian, and they're going to be charged with robbing and murdering an individual. And the case isn't very strong. They actually use a witness, a 13, 14-year-old boy who said he could just tell by the way Vanzetti walked that it was him, and which is not a whole lot of evidence. And both guys will be executed by the end of the decade. The guys on the right, this is Loeb and Leopold. Both of them had exceptional IQs. Loeb had an IQ of 160, and Leopold had an IQ of 210. Leopold was going to Harvard. These guys were very intelligent, IQ-wise, but they want to go on a thrill, and that thrill is to murder somebody and see if they can get away with it. Loeb's father was second in command of Sears Roebuck, which is a company that was delivering things out to rural areas, and a magazine company that was delivering products to you wherever you ordered. And how they actually found out who kidnapped and killed this kid who just disappeared was the fact Leopold's glasses fell out at the crime scene. And there was a very unique frame, so they were able to trace that. And then also the ransom note was traced to their typewriter. So those two things gave them away. And actually, a guy by the name of Darrow will defend both these kids, and he'll be famous for another trial as well, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But Leopold him and Loeb, they do this, and it kind of reinforces to America that all the morals of the past are breaking down. These 2 do get convicted. They serve time in prison. Loeb is killed by another inmate because he claimed that Loeb was making sexual advances. Both these 2 kind of had homosexual tendencies towards one another, so that's not far-fetched. Leopold was let out 33 years later. He will die of a heart attack 10 years after that. And up to this day, most people think that Loeb was the one who planned, carried it out, and committed a crime. Leopold was just picked a bad friend. So we see that going on. And then the third famous trial, and we're looking at all this modernity versus tradition. We see this pendulum swinging back. We have the third very famous trial, probably the most famous trial of the 1920s, along with those other 2, would be science versus religion. And we see this in the forms of the Scopes trial, also known as the Scopes monkey trial. We have Darrow and William Jennings Bryan will square off in a place called Dayton, Tennessee. And a substitute teacher it was against the law to teach evolution will be kind of pressured or asked to be a guinea pig and actually challenge us. And he started teaching evolution. He is charged with teaching evolution, violating the law. And we see these guys go at it in Dayton, Tennessee. It's very hot. It's in July. And what ends up happening is Darrow puts William Jennings Bryan. Darrow is defending Scopes. William Jennings Bryan is prosecuting. And then these 2 go at it, and Darrow puts William Jennings Bryan on the stand and makes a fool out of him. William Jennings Bryan, he brings up all the biblical accounts and asks him if they are. Darrow asks him if they are literal interpretations, and William Jennings Bryan says they are, and this leads to him being ridiculed. Scopes actually does get convicted, but it's not like he serves any time. He pays a fine. Actually, the organization that kind of pressured him into doing it, they will actually pay the fine for him. So we do see that William Jennings Bryan actually dies within a week after this trial, which I thought was interesting. Had a heart attack. I think maybe it was due to all the stress and the fact that he was ridiculed so significantly from Darrow. Now, we're looking going into the Great Depression, the stock market crash here. This you're looking at here is the Dawes Plan. You're looking at this on the right. This is how loans were paid. We had World War I. It was a costly war. This is actually when the money shifts over to America. America becomes the number one creditor, banker throughout the world. And we're going to see Britain and France are going to pay America our loans they owe us. But the only way they pay us our loans is through Germany paying reparations to them. The only way Germany got paid reparations was from borrowing money from the United States. So this is just a cycle. And Germany is a democracy in the 1920s and up through the early 1930s. But we see, as a result of this Dawes Plan, we see this is going to be a problem when the stock market crashes. And America calls for this money back that they can't get from Germany. Germany can't pay them. It's going to lead to economic uncertainty in Germany and a very scary situation economically. And this will lead to the rise of Adolf Hitler and all the problems we have going into with World War II. Before we get to that stock market crash, though, we have this guy. This is Herbert Hoover. He is somebody who was known as a great organizer. He served under presidents in different capacities, under Coolidge, for example. He is somebody who has traveled over to China. He was there during the Boxer Rebellion in China when him and his family were actually surrounded by the Boxers in the city of Shanghai, I believe. And obviously he survives that. He organizes relief for starving people in Belgium during the German invasion of Belgium. He organizes the relief of flood victims in New Orleans, the Great Mississippi Flood. So he's somebody who's actually a boy wonder at the time. FDR, he even quipped, who succeed him, that Herbert Hoover would make a fantastic president. So we see this guy, he has a lot of hype coming in. He is somebody who's lets that go to his head a little bit. Not a great speaker, not somebody who's going to inspire people. He's more of an introvert. But he had really no experience in the Senate, but he thought, and he could sometimes be cold and distant. He kind of is a great example of sometimes don't believe the hype. He's known as he's a multimillionaire. He is believed to be somebody that would be good for the economy, keep the economy going, which is ironic because as a businessman, he's going to have the worst economic disaster in American history. He was 56 when he took office. He was a glory hound. And he's somebody who, by the way, it was Tianjin is the city that he was surrounded in. And remember the fact that he's not a great speaker. So when things hit the fan here soon, he's not going to be somebody who can inspire people to just weather the storm. That'll be his successor that's able to do that. So he's one of the most heralded politicians in the country. People were excited that he's going to take the initiative. But he believed in cooperativism, and volunteerism. He did not believe the government should be hands-on. He was a very laissez-faire, which is going to play a huge role in the fact he's going to be hated. And we see the Depression looming on the horizon. There's signs, late 1920s, that the country is slowing down. And you can see here through just purchasing things, it's going to dwindle. Late 1920s, you're going to see people not purchasing many things, and I'm gonna cut this off here in 1 second. This is actually the most famous trial from the 1930s. I just wanted to hit on this. The Scottsboro Boys. These kids, ranging from like 13 through early 20s, are going to be charged and convicted of raping 2 white women on a train. The sad part is one of the white girls actually will later recant her story, and these 2 girls were actually they were giving themselves up for sex to get paid for sex. and one will actually stand on the side of these Scottsboro boys, but many of them will still serve until one of them, last one got released in 1950s. So it's a very sad case of, again, reinforcing the racism of the South and in America at the time. Now, I'm going to cut us off here. I'll close it down. It won't be very long. Great Depression.